JavaScript has a lot of very helpful features that help make your code easier to write and a lot more reusable, and higher order functions are no exception to that. So today, let's learn about higher order functions, what they are, how we can create our own, and how we can use the built-in JavaScript higher order functions. So what exactly is a higher order function? Well, a higher order function is a function that takes another function as an argument, or it returns a function. So let's go ahead and use this here as an example for how we can create our own higher order functions. So I've gone ahead and created a function here called main, and then I've also got another function here called calculate, which takes in a radius and a logic. Now let's pretend that we're creating a game, and this game is a bunch of spheres, and we're not saving any information other than the radius of each one of those spheres. But sometimes we need more than that. Sometimes we need the diameter of each sphere, and sometimes we need the area of each sphere. But we're only saving the radius. So this is where this calculate function comes in. It's going to take in the radius as an array that we've got here, and it's going to take in a function for finding either the diameter or the area, depending on which one we need at the time. So let's go ahead and see how this works, and let's create both of our functions for getting the area and for getting the diameter. Now, if you didn't know, the diameter is 2 times the radius. So we're going to first create the diameter function. We're going to say const get diameter is equal to an arrow function. And then in this function, we're just going to return 2 times the radius. And that's it. That's going to be our function there. And the same is going to go for the area. So the const get area is going to be equal to another arrow function. And then if you didn't know, area is equal to pi r squared. So we're going to take a return, and we're going to take math.pi, and we're going to multiply that by math.pow, passing in the radius to the power of 2. And that's just going to get returned from this function. Now let's save our area and our diameter inside a function. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const area is going to be equal to the calculate function, and we're going to pass in our radius array, and we're going to pass in the function that we want executed inside of the calculate function. So we're going to pass in, for the area, we're going to pass in get area. Now, this function is going to be passed in, and it's going to be executed multiple times throughout the loop, so that way we can get the area of each individual item inside of our array. And let's just do the exact same thing for the diameter. So we're going to say const diameter is equal to the calculate function, and the calculate function again is going to take in our radius and is going to take in the get diameter function. Now let's just go ahead and log out these values. So we're going to say console.log, and we're going to say the calculated areas are, and then let's log out the calculated areas. So we're going to say the area variable, and let's do the exact same thing for the diameters, and we will log out the diameter variable. And if we save that, you're going to see that we get the calculated areas are in a bunch of not a numbers. And the reason that we're getting not a number is because up here inside of the function call, where we call this logic function, which is being passed in as the get diameter and the get area functions, we are actually expecting to pass in a value, the value of the radius at the current index of the array. So we actually need to expect that as a parameter inside of the function definitions down here. So let's just go ahead and add the radius to this and to this. Now if we save that, we should get the calculated areas are, and then the 3 calculated areas, along with the calculated diameters and their 3 calculated diameters as well. Now I don't know about you, but that whole section with the custom higher order functions just gave me an entire headache. So let's go ahead and look at something a little bit easier and a little bit easier to wrap your head around. The built-in JavaScript higher order function is, and we're going to start with the ForEach method. Now, the built-in for each higher order function is actually an array method that's going to loop through each element inside of an array, and it's going to do something to each one of those elements inside of that array. So let's go ahead and see how this works. First, I'm going to go ahead and comment out this main function here so we don't get that output to our console as well. And then I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call this function add10. And what this function is going to do is it's going to loop through each one of the array elements, and it's going to add 10 to each one of those array elements. So let's just go ahead and call the add10 method because we're going to need to do that. Now, the first thing we need is our array itself. So we're going to create our array, and we're going to say array is equal to an array with, let's just say 1, 2, and 3 inside of it. Now we need some type of output, and let's just actually output this inside of an array. So we're going to say const output is equal to an empty array for now. Next, we need to actually create the ForEach function. So let's say array.ForEach. And this ForEach function is going to take in a callback function. And generally, these callback functions are just arrow functions. So we're going to say an arrow function inside of this function. And this is the higher order part where it is a function that takes in another function. And this callback function is actually going to take in 1 or 2 arguments depending on how you need it. The first argument is going to be the individual item inside of the array. So we're going to say item. In the second argument, we're not going to worry about that right now, but we'll take a look at that here in just a second. So let's just go ahead and write our ForEach higher order function. And the only thing that we're going to do is we're going to say output, and we're going to push each item plus 10 to that output. So what's going to happen here is we're going to create our array, and it's going to be created as 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to create an empty array called output. Now we're going to loop through each item inside of this array, and we're going to push each individual item plus 10 to our output array. So whenever all said and done, this output array should be full with 3 items that are 10 more than each one of these items inside of this array. So if we just console.log output, and if we save that, you're going to see we get an array with 11, 12, and 13. So what actually happened here was we started looping through, and this item right here, this item that we defined inside of the callback function, is actually going to be the individual item for each iteration. So our first iteration, we're going to push item, and this can be perceived as index 0. So item is going to be the first item in the array. We're going to push it plus 10 to this output array. Then we're going to loop back around, and we're going to get the second item in the array. And we're going to keep going until we are done looping through the array. Now, I mentioned that we can actually pass in 2 elements to the ForEach method. So let's go ahead and take a look at that and see what the second argument is. So let's just go ahead and comment this out here so we don't get that output. And let's just create another function. We're going to call this add arrays. And this add arrays is going to do exactly that. It's going to add 2 separate arrays. So let's just go ahead and call the add arrays function. And inside of the add arrays function, let's just go ahead and create a constant called array1. And we'll set that equal to an array. We'll say it's 1, 2, and 3. And then let's create another array. We'll say const array2 is equal to 89. Actually, let's create the array 89, 55, 26. And now we need our output array. So we're going to say const output is equal to an empty array. Now we're just going to go ahead and loop through array1. So we're going to say array1.forEach, and we are going to pass in our callback function. So we'll pass in our callback function just like that. Now, inside of the callback function, we need to pass in 2 separate arguments. The first one, of course, is going to be the item again for the individual item inside of the array1 array. So we're going to say item, And then the second argument is actually the current index. So we're going to pass in the current index of the current iteration. So it's the exact same thing as whenever you're creating a for loop, it's the I whenever you're looping through the current iteration of I. So we're going to pass in I here. Next thing, we're basically going to do the exact same thing as we did up here. So we're going to say output.push, and we're just going to push on there item, which is the current item inside of array1, and then we're going to add array2 at index I. So when all said and done, we're going to loop through the array1, and then we're going to push onto the output array the first value in array1 plus the first value in array2. And then it's going to loop through and do the second value and the second value, and then the third value and the third value. Now let's just go ahead and console.log output. And if we save that, we should get 90, 57, and 29. So we added this 1 and this 89 to get 90. We added this 2 and this 55 to get 57. And then we added this 3 and this 26 to get 29. Now this approach here only works if both of the arrays are exactly the same length. So if they have the exact same number of elements inside of each one of them. Now there's actually a slightly easier and cleaner way of doing this up here and getting the exact same result without needing this extra output array variable. So let's see how we can do that using the map method. So let's first go ahead and comment out this so we don't get that output. And then I'm going to create a new function, and I'm just going to call this the new add10 function. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to create our array. So we can say const array is equal to an array, and we're just going to do the 1, 2, 3 array again. Now the way that the map method works is it's going to work on the array, and we're going to pass in each item individually, and it's going to do something to each item, and then it's going to return it to a new array. So at the end, we're going to have a new array based off of the original array. So let's see how this works. I'm first going to say const result, and this is going to be the result of our map method. And then we're going to say Array.Map. And this is our higher order function, and it's going to take in another callback function. And of course, this callback function takes in both a value and an index, just like the ForEach method. And here we just need the item. So we're just going to pass in the item, and then we're going to create our callback function. Now, inside of here, we actually just need to return whatever value we want added to the array. So this is going to take in the item. So we're going to say return, and then we're going to say item plus 10. And this is going to return this to our new array, and it's going to return that result to the result variable. So at the end, we should have the exact same result as we had up here, just without that output array. So we can just go ahead and console.log the result variable, and then if we call the new add10 method, and we save that, we can see that we get the 11, 12, and 13, just like we got up here with the original add10 method. So the way that this works is it's going to loop through each individual item in the array. This is each individual item. Then we're going to return this to a new array that it's going to create behind the scenes for us. So it's going to create this new array behind the scenes for us, and it's going to add each one of these to that array until we get to the end of this array. So it'll loop through the first one, add 10, and then it's going to automatically just push that value onto that new array. And then once we get to the end of this array, then it's just going to return that whole result back to us, and it's going to save it inside of that result variable. So that's how we get the 11, 12, and 13 array whenever we use the map method. Now the next array method that we're going to take a look at is going to be an array method that returns true or false, and it's going to check to see if at least one value inside of that array, based on the criteria that we pass in, is going to be true or false. So as long as one of them is true, then the whole thing is going to return true, and if none of them are true, then it's going to return false. So let's see how this works. So let's go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to create a function we're going to create a function called Some Even. And then we are going to call this function. So we're going to say Some Even and call it. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create our array. So we're going to say const array, and we're going to set that equal to a bunch of random numbers. So we're going to say 86, 25, 93. And then we need to create our sum method. So we're going to say const is even, and we're going to set that equal to Array.Some. Now this Array.Some method is going to take in another callback function. So we're going to create our callback function, and this callback function is going to take in just a single item argument. So we're going to say item, and you can name that whatever you want, just like all the other ones. And then we're just going to return, and we're going to see if each one of those elements inside of that array are even, or if every single element inside of that array is odd. So as long as there's at least one inside of that array that's even, then we're going to return true. If none of them are even, then we're going to return false. So we're going to say item, and then we're going to say modulo 2 is equal to 0. And this is how you can check to see if something is even or if something is odd. So if this returns true, then it's going to be even. If it returns false, then it's going to be odd. So now all we have to do is just console.log is even. And if we save that, we're going to get true logged out to the console. Now, whenever we loop through this, we're going to first check 86, and right away, this is going to see that this is true. So it's going to immediately stop, and it's going to return true, because at least only one of them needs to be true for the whole thing to be true. So once it hits 86, it's just going to stop and it's going to return true. But let's pass in 85. Now all of them are odd numbers, so we should get false, and we do. So as long as at least one of them is even we can add 94 here, and it's still going to return true over here in the console. Now another similar method to this is going to be the Array.Every method. And this is going to be basically the exact opposite of the Array.Some method, where every element inside of the array has to be true for the whole thing to be true, or else it's going to be false. So let's check this out. So we're going to comment this out, and we're going to create a new function, and this function is going to be all evens, and we're going to quickly create our array, and we're going to set that equal to 86, 94, 5. And let's just go ahead and say const all are even, and we're going to set that equal to our Array.Every method. Now the Array.Every method, just like the Array.Some, is going to take in a callback function, and it's going to take in the item, and then we can pass in that callback function to that every method, and then we can return whether this is true or false. So we can check to see if this is even. So we can say item modulo 2 is equal to 0. And as long as every single item in this element array is true, then the whole thing is going to return true. But as soon as a single element is not even, this whole thing is going to return false. So let's just go ahead and console.log all are even. And if we save that, we are not going to get anything to the console because we need to call the all evens method. Now if we save that, we are going to get false to the console. And as long as these are all even, so we can say 4, then it's going to be true. But if we have even a single element that is not going to meet this criteria right here, then it's going to return the whole thing to be false, just like you can see with this 5 being added in here. Now the next method is going to be the filter method, and this method is going to filter out anything that meets the conditions that we specify. So let's go ahead and create another function. We're going to create a function called Array.Filter, and we are going to create an array. So we're going to create an array called array, and we're going to just create an array, and I'm actually going to create some strings here. So let's say this is going to be JavaScript function. We're going to say face, stop, and we'll say eat. And this is going to be our array. And let's just go ahead and call this array filter function. And then after this, we are going to create our filter method. So we're going to say const new array is equal to array.filter. And this again is going to take in a callback function. So we're going to pass in the item in the individual array. And then we are going to return, and this is where our condition is going to go. So let's just say that item.length, so we're going to check to see if the length is greater than 4. So as long as it's longer than 4 characters, then we're going to keep it inside of the array. Otherwise, if it is not greater than 4, so if it's 4 or less, then we're going to filter that one out. So as long as it's greater than 4 in length, then it's going to be kept in. So let's just say console.log, and we're going to say new array. And if we save that, we're going to get a new array with these 2 values passed in, because these 2 here are the only 2 that are actually longer than 4 characters in length. These 2 here are exactly 4 characters, which is not longer, but it's equal to 4. So that gets filtered out. And this one, of course, is less than 4 characters. So that one gets filtered out as well. So if it meets the criteria, so if the item.length is greater than 4, then it's going to be kept into the new array. And if it meets the conditions, then it's going to be filtered out. Now, there's actually one more built-in higher order function that we can actually use. And this is probably one of the more difficult ones to wrap your head around. So I'll try to explain it a little bit more in depth. So let's go ahead and just comment this out. And I think I forgot to comment this one out too. So let's go ahead and do that. Now let's just go ahead and create our function. And we're going to create the reduce array function. And then we're just going to go ahead and call the reduce array function. Now inside of here, we're going to, of course, create our array. So we're going to say const array, and we're going to set that equal to a few values. We're going to say 54, 22, 96. And then we're going to say const result, and we're going to set that equal to array.reduce. And this reduce method, what it does is it's going to take all of the values inside of the array and reduce it all down to one single value, however you specify it. So there's actually 2 values that this callback function is going to take in. The first value is going to be the previous value. The second value is going to be the current value. And there's actually a third value that we could pass in here, but I'll explain that here in a minute. So let's go ahead and create this function. And all we're going to do is we're going to return previous val plus current val. And this is just going to reduce the array down to a single value, and it's going to add all of those values together. So when all is said and done, we're just going to be adding all of these 3 values together, and it's going to save that in our result. Now, that doesn't seem very complicated. It seems pretty easy, to be completely honest, but there's one more portion to this. We can actually add, we don't have to, but we can actually add an initial value. So after the callback function, we can add an initial value. And let's just do it before the initial value. So let's not pass in the initial value at first. Then let's try passing in the initial value. So let's just go ahead and console.log result. And if we save that, we're going to get 172. And that should be the sum of all 3 of these numbers together. Now, the initial value is going to be used as this previous value for the first index. So it's going to be the first initial value. And if we pass in an initial value here of, let's just say 5, we're going to get 177. So it used that initial value and added it on to all of the other values. So this has just created a single value out of all of these values by reducing it down to a single value. Now we can also do this with strings as well. So if we created an array with strings, we can say hi, hello, and bye. We can actually take previous value dot concat, and we can concat on the current value. We should remove the initial value, of course, and whenever we do that, then it's going to concatenate all of these things together inside of this array to a single value. Now, I've talked a lot about these higher order functions and how they work, and I hope that's helped you a good bit today. But there's actually a different way that we can write some of these. And if you remember my functions video, link up in the cards if you want to go and check it out, we talked about implicit returns. Now, an implicit return is a return that is going to return a value implicitly without a return statement, but it has to be a specific way. It has to be written a specific way, and we have not done that today. But many of these can be implicit returned, and many of these are written as an implicit return just because many of them are just a single line that all it does is an operation and then it returns a value. So let's see how we can implicit return some of these values. So let's just go ahead and comment out this reduce array, and let's go back to this map method here, and let's uncomment this here. So to implicitly return this, we can actually just remove the curly braces, and we can remove the return statement along with this semicolon at the end. And if we save that, we are going to still get the exact same result. So this is a much more popular way that you would see a mapped array function being called, because this is much shorter and it's much cleaner to see and to write. So another way we could do that was we could do this with this one as well, and the only thing that requires an implicit return is that you only do one operation and it's on a single line and it doesn't actually have a return statement. So again, this right here, if we comment this one out and we uncomment this one, we are going to still get the exact same result because this is being implicit returned. Now, we can also do the exact same thing with many of these other ones. So we could implicitly return this one here, the filter method. So we could say remove all of this here, remove the semicolon, and we could implicitly return this. So if we uncomment this here, we should get the exact same result that we did when we were just regular return. So I hope this makes a little bit more sense. I hope this helps you a lot. And if you have any questions about any of these, please leave them down in the comments section down below. I will answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, if you did like the video, make sure you slap a like on it. Check out the full playlist. Link is right next to me. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.